Welcome to Mrs. T. Fox Resources on YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about portraiture. Specifically, we're going to be talking about drawing the human eye. When I teach portraiture, I teach it on a very firm scaffold. Kids learn to draw eyes, then noses, then mouths, both closed and open. Then they learn to draw hair, both curly and straight. And then they move on to their final self-portrait. We call it an expressive self-portrait. So without further ado, let's get started. Everything that you see back here, this is all part of the scaffold. So when I teach portraiture, they start with, it's about a 3-week endeavor. And we start with eyes, and then they go to noses, and then they go to, where is the mouths? Do I have any mouths up here? I don't have any mouths up here. Do I? Oh yeah, there's one right there. They go to a closed mouth, they go to an open mouth, and then they do hair. And then we go to the expressive portrait. And the way that I kind of flesh out doing the reference photos is during the week that they're doing this is about a week. That's when we take our reference photos. So we kind of work it into the practice. And then by the time we're ready for the portrait, not only does everybody have a reference photo and it's already sized, and all that good stuff is already taken care of, but the practice is done, the confidence is built, and so we're ready to rock and roll. This happens at the end of my value unit. So what they're doing is they're doing the value sphere, then they're doing a small practice, not features or anything like that, but just a small value practice. Then they're going to do something probably just a little bit bigger, just so they really can handle the graphite pencil and the value, and then we move to this. So this is 3 weeks. The other, probably the little sphere and the practice is about a week and a half. So it's, value is a pretty big chunk of what we do, but I teach drawing before I teach painting, and I really like them to have a grasp on this. This comes before colored pencil, and they really need a grasp on this. The reason that this grid is so light is nothing annoys me more than when I used to put really dark grids on my worksheets and the kids would draw something totally amazing and beautiful, and it would have a big black grid through it. And that used to just drive me crazy. So when I started making my worksheets for you guys, I'm like, okay, what can I do? Well, I'll just make it light gray. All right. I give you the grid option and the non-grid option because you have different skill levels in your class. Your kids need different things. We really need to make sure everybody has a win. And so I'm using the grid here, but if you have more advanced students in your class and they don't need a grid, then have them not use a grid. So we're going to just lay this out. At this point, my kids have done a line drawing lesson, a shape drawing lesson, negative space. They've done negative space, and they have, of course, I just told you, started into the value. So they're very familiar with how to use the quadrant. I only ever give a quadrant. Usually don't give any more than that as far as the grid goes. Because at the end of the day, we're progressing toward drawing from life. And of course, you can't put a grid on anything that's from life. So all right. I always have them focus. Let's focus on the big idea. No two eyes are the same. We're not drawing a football with a basketball in the middle of it. We're looking, it's a very right-brained approach when you're doing portraiture because everybody's different. And what makes people who they are are things like their temporal lobe, and the bridge of their nose. Do they have a heavy eyelid? Do they have a lighter eyelid? Are their eyes wider? Are they more narrow? And I usually do a little demo where I'll just have random kids sit down in front of me and I'll just draw their eye real quick. And then it'll almost be like a round robin where I'll say, okay, you come sit down, you come sit down. And then by the time I get through about 6 kids, we stop and we look at everybody's eyes and they're like, whoa. Everybody's eyes really are different. So the big idea first, I will tend to talk about one thing and then talk about another thing and then talk about another thing. So if you feel like you got a little whiplash, it's because That's my brain is constantly going. And I'm always trying to think, what do my people need to know? What do I need to tell them to make them successful? That goes for my educators. My goal is to always help, make your job easier. And remember, they've had extensive work in scale, proportion, all of those things. When I'm talking to them in these terms, they already know all this stuff. So that's the other reason I scaffold everything, is it just makes it easier. If they already have basic knowledge on certain things, then you don't have to, go all the way back to the beginning. You can say to them, okay, remember when we did this? Remember when we talked about negative space? Like with that, at this point in the semester, they're just coming off a negative space. So I can say things to them like, see the negative space that's right here around the iris, in the white of the eye, and the whites of your eyes are not white. That's the other thing that we focus on. So people don't look like they're terrified all the time because they don't have any value in their eye. I have, before COVID, I did these demos live, and I did them smaller so that we could get through them quickly. Then everybody went home on lockdown, and I shot a round of tutorials that is included in my portraiture curriculum, shameless plug. And what I did when we came back was we watched the videos together. So as we watched them together, then I was able to give them extra instruction while we were watching it as a class. And that made sure that everybody watched it. And that made sure that if we had any questions, they could be answered for the whole class to hear. All right, so there's our big idea. There is our big idea. And we have this little value scale at the top here, and I always have them refer to the value scale. And I'll have them put this right next to it and ask themselves questions like, if this isn't dark enough in here, if they're working in this area, I'll say, now how dark is that value? And they'll say, oh my goodness, it's like all the way up here. And I'll say, well, then you need this much value in this area. So it's a really great little reference for them to use. And they can, like I said, put that right next to it and check their values. Sometimes I'll even have them switch papers and check each other's values. And that's always really cool because that's a fresh eye. So now that we have the contour line drawing, we're going to add our value. And it really doesn't matter where you start. I like them to work light to dark, because if they get in here and really start bearing down hard, what happens is you can't erase without making a nice, gross, smudging mess. So the more of a conservative approach that they take, the better. I also don't like them to work on the side of the pencil, just because controlling any medium is the name of the game. We want to be able to control it so that we can get it to do what we want it to do. And graphite is a little bit of a beast, because if you get your hand in it and smudge it around, you get a mess. If you get too dark, like I just said before, then you're going to get a mess if you try to make changes. So the more conservative approach they take, the better. I always tell them, especially middle schoolers, make sure you don't choke up on your pencil and grip it real tight. You want to hold it nice and light so that you can let the graphite float across the paper. This paper right here is called Nina, is the brand name. It's a cardstock with a vellum finish. The vellum finish is only on one side, but here's the beautiful part. It's got some tooth to it. It's already cut to paper size. So you can stick it in the copier and copy your worksheets, and they have a little bit of tooth. If they're drawing on straight computer paper, oh gosh, sliding all over the place. And there's just no way for the paper to grab the pencil, and it's frustrating for them. You don't want them ever to be frustrated, frustrated to the point of checking out or acting out. Confident kids are engaged kids. Confident kids are kids who stay in the game. I've seen it over and over. All right, let's talk about value shapes. So there are value shapes. This is a puzzle. This is exactly how I teach it and how I talk about it. This is a puzzle made up of a variety of shapes. Each shape has a value, like we just talked about. And if you draw the shapes correctly and add the value correctly, it's a formula. You will have a beautiful, realistic eye. This is not about, are you artistic or are you not artistic? Everybody can do this if they follow the formula. So I'm just adding my value and I'm examining my reference photo. You're reading the reference photo for crisp edges and soft edges. This eye is floating around in liquid. Therefore, there will be soft edges between the iris, the white of the eye. I'm using little tiny circles to lay in my value. I don't really like them to do the harsh hatching because it's hard to come back from it if they get heavy-handed. If they're using little circles like this in the beginning, then they can float the value and they can control the blend better. As far as eyelashes go, those are not spiders crawling across your face. That's exactly how I tell it to them. No spiders. We want to not put those on until the very end because they're the closest thing to us. So we're kind of drawing what's behind first. We're really looking at shapes and the edges and the way everything is relating to each other. Drawing is about relationships. Where is this in relation to this, in relation to this? How do things line up? When they do the shape lesson and the line lesson in the very beginning of the semester, that's when they do all of their citing and all of their dropping their plumb line and seeing how things line up. And then when they get to negative space, we really hone in on that. And I'm just building this value slowly. I don't have anything in here that's super, super like paper white. Maybe in these two areas right here, don't want to have outlines. We want to have edges. So let's come down here. I got my pencil super, super sharp, and now I need to like dull it down a little bit so I can make these lighter values. The really light values are the hard ones. We don't use any blending stumps in my room. And the only reason we don't is because they just get blending stump happy. And they just grind the value down into the paper and they mash the tooth to the point where they can't. And it's not their fault. It's just because, I don't know, if you're a kid, that seems like fun, right? Going at it with that blending stump. So with my beginners, I like to just keep them using the pencil and really getting as much control from the pencil as they possibly can. You know, when they get to be in my advanced class, if they really want to, try the blending stump, but I'm going to tell you what normally happens is they start using that stump and they're like, oh my gosh, I just ruined all this beautiful line work that I made. And I'm like, oh, okay, well then don't use it. But it's not that I'm anti-blending stump. It's just, I just have found it easier and they have more success with it. And I'm all about success for everybody. I mean, it's super if you have, wonderfully talented, naturally gifted kids in your room. That's always a gift, but they're all a gift and they all need a win. So if I can take everybody through the formula and everybody draws a nice portrait that they can be proud of, that's a win. So have them do this upside down part of the time, just so they can get a fresh angle on it. It always helps. It helps me. And I've been drawing for years because, your brain gets used to looking at it and your brain tells you to quit looking at the reference photo because you know what an eye looks like. How many eyes do we see every day? Hundreds. So we have to stay in tune with the reference photo. We have to stay connected to it. To see student work, if you've not seen portraiture work, you can check out my Instagram, Mrs. T. Fox Resources, my Pinterest. There's just tons and tons and tons of student work. I think I just put a portraiture reel on last night on Instagram. And that's just so you can see, if, you know, like I said, if you've not been to the party before, just so you can see what the kids do with this particular method. And this is usually about a 2-day. Eyes usually take about 2 days. Noses usually take about a day, day and a half. We were on a 90-minute block. Mouths usually take 2 days. It's about a week, maybe a week and a day to get through the features. And then the hair usually goes pretty quick. And of course, that all depends on the size, you know, the finished size of the features. Sometimes we do them really big and sometimes we do them smaller. That's why I'm a fan of the worksheet, because it's easy to manage, easy to handle, easy to store. The kids hang their work daily on the board in progress. So that's easy to do if the work is smaller. And it's easier for them to get a win. Remember, we want a win for everybody. And if they're not covering a lot of acreage, it's easier for them to have success because they don't burn out, no burnout, and no checkout, because it's something that they can do. It's got to be doable, or they won't finish. They won't be engaged if they don't think they can do it. But because this falls at the end, towards the middle to end of the semester, their confidence is so high. When we get into the iris and they start doing these really hard lines, I'll just say, hey, you know, like, is that really what you see? Tell me what you see. Don't draw what you know, draw what you see. And then they'll go, oh yeah, I don't see any hard lines in there. Right. So don't draw them. So I'm just starting to close in again. This is a little negative space thing. Let's say, hey guys, close in on this reflection and give it a nice little crisp edge. We're kind of molding the values slowly. This is very therapeutic too. I always sell shading, even with colored pencil. When I teach colored pencil, I'm like, guys, this is our chance to relax. Like, life is hard enough. Let's get in here and just do some shading, draw something cool. We're also describing surface, which in this case is skin. So we are telling the viewer, drawing is visual communication. So we're telling the viewer what they're looking at. You are looking at an eye. You are looking at skin. And how do we tell them that? Well, we use the right values and we use the right edges and we use the right scale and proportion, and then they know what they're looking at. And the kids are like, oh, that's all we're doing? And I'm like, yeah, that's all we're doing. There's no big mystery here. You can do this. Just keep asking yourself, is the shape the right shape? Is the value the right value? Is the edge the right edge? If you answer all those questions correctly, if your answer is yes, then guess what you have? A realistic eye, or whatever else you're trying to draw. And erasing just abrades the paper and it takes a layer off. So the more that they erase, then when they go to add graphite back in, they get like a really, it's like almost like a fuzzy area on the paper that they almost can't add the graphite to. And it gets really frustrating, especially depending on the kind of paper you are using. That can really be a thing. I always use the Blick 80-pound sulfite paper. There will be a link to that also in the video description. just don't want any hard lines in there. There are no hard lines. We do this whole thing in my class about, we talk about drawing kids and how kids don't have any hard lines in their face because they don't have any wrinkles. Yeah, they're all fat and cartilage. And as we get older, we lose that. So you don't want hard value edges in a young face. What they'll want to do is they'll want to do this and make these eyelashes. But before they do eyelashes, I'll say, okay, like really look and tell me what you see. Tell me the kind of shape those eyelashes are making. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then we talk about how the eyelid is out over the eye. It covers the eye. It's casting this shadow. So all of the physical attributes of the eye and what those attributes do for us as the artist. How do we need to interpret that? It's a little tiny darker line right there. It doesn't really go all the way across. And it's little things like this, little details that really make a drawing dynamic. And the portraits that you see on my Instagram, the ones that are done in graphite, that's all beginners. So those are my drawing one kids. So they have not drawn, most of them have never drawn a portrait. And all they're doing is implementing everything we learned from the beginning of the semester into portraiture. Because I like to say, I'm a big proponent that subject matter is really not an indicator of whether you can draw something or not. If you have the tools, if you understand negative space, value, shape, if you understand scale, if you understand proportion, I could put anything in front of you and you could draw it. Because you have the tools, because you have the resources. And that takes a lot of the fear out too, when I explain it to them, because, you know, people are all the time saying, oh, I really like to draw, but I can't draw people. Well, why not? Says who? I say you can't draw people yet. Follow me on the journey. We'll draw some people. And then this is even darker right here in the crease. So see, as soon as we add that value, we get the eyelid going back into the orbital bone. We get dimension. This is way too light. We need to make this darker. Always asking them to make, you know, have a dialogue with themselves and say, okay, if it doesn't look right, why doesn't it look right? First thing we do is we flip it upside down. Second thing we do is we start examining edges, values, areas for correct value and for correct shape and proportion and things like that. And we just ask ourselves test questions. And then we answer the questions. And if the questions are, no, this isn't right, well, then we go back and fix it. I mean, you're here, right? You're in class. We're not going anywhere. We might as well do it right. And then they start seeing how successful they can be. And then they start going, okay, this woman might know what she's talking about. I might be amazing, just like she said. Because see, that's what it says right there. You're amazing. So I tell them, if you're not sure that you're amazing, just look up at the worksheet. Okay, I'm amazing. All right, let's go. Let's work. And more value in the white of the eye. Some more round. That orb will look, because it's inside the orbital bone. And please don't forget to like this video, share this video, subscribe to my channel, and join my email list at mrstfoxresources.com. And don't forget to check back because there's more content on the way.